Bernadette Hedgehog. Sonic's mother spent most of her son's childhood working for the man trying to kill him, and she did not choose it, and she did not know it was happening in any way she could act on. Bernadette Hedgehog, Bunnie for short, is Jules Hedgehog's wife and Sonic's mother in the Archie Comics continuity, and her defection is the quietest one in the entire franchise because it happened in a laboratory rather than on a battlefield. Bunnie was roboticized in a lab accident while tampering with the Roboticizer, and the timing is the cruelest part of it. She was converted before Doctor Robotnik's coup, before there was a freedom fighters movement to belong to, before there was a war to pick a side in. When the coup came, she was already a machine on the inventory list, and the inventory changed hands. So she became one of Robotnik's robot slaves. Not a soldier, not a lieutenant. A slave, one unit in a labor force, and she stayed in that condition long enough that she missed out on watching her son grow up entirely. Sonic went from a small child to the fastest thing alive, and the most wanted terrorist on the planet while his mother was on a work roster in the capital city. And that is what makes roboticization in this continuity so much nastier than a straightforward mind control plot. Roboticization does not kill you. It suppresses the mind and erases the will while leaving the person underneath intact, aware, and unable to intervene. Whatever Bunnie's body was doing for Robotnik, Bunnie was in there. She was eventually restored, along with most of the population who had been converted, which is where the story would normally end on a warm note. It does not, and the reason is her husband. When the mass restoration happened, everyone came back to flesh and blood except Jules. Bunnie got her body, her voice, and her son back, and then had to live in a family where her husband alone remained a machine. Bunnie is the entry that establishes the rule for the rest of this list. In Sonic, switching sides is not usually a moral decision. It is usually something done to a person. Jules Hedgehog. Sonic's father is a robot, and the reason he is a robot is that being a robot was the only alternative to being dead. Jules Hedgehog was created by Ken Penders and introduced in Sonic Super Special No. 2 in 1997, and his origin is a medical emergency rather than a villain's plot. Jules was critically injured on a mission alongside his brother, and the injuries were bad enough that the only thing on the planet capable of saving his life was Charles Hedgehog's experimental Roboticizer. The machine was never designed as a weapon. It was designed as a last resort surgical option, and Jules is the patient it was used on. Then Julian got to it. As Julian, the man who would become Doctor Robotnik, was already plotting against the kingdom, and he sabotaged the Roboticizer before Jules went in, setting it to fully convert him rather than partially repair him. The procedure saved Jules' life exactly as promised. It also suppressed his mind, erased his free will, and produced an obedient mechanical slave, which is what Julian had wanted out of it all along. The first roboticization was a rescue that a traitor turned into a recruitment. Jules remained fully aware of what was taking place around him and was completely powerless to act against it. Read that twice. He watched the coup. He watched a war start. He watched his own son become the Resistance's most famous soldier, and he was standing there in a robot body carrying out orders the entire time. His free will came back in the year 3235, restored by his brother using a power ring. Not a cure, though, just the will. The body stayed metal. And that is the detail that gives Jules the saddest ending on this list. When most of the Robians were suddenly turned back into flesh and blood by an alien, everyone reverted except Jules. Every other family got their person back whole. Sonic's family got a father who could think, choose, and love, permanently welded inside the thing that had been used against them. It is an oddity that haunts both him and his family, and the comics never let it go. He switched back to the right side, he never got to switch back to being himself. Sir Charles Hedgehog, Uncle Chuck, built the machine. That is the fact that makes him the most compromised hedgehog on this list, and the most useful one. Sir Charles Hedgehog, known to everyone as Uncle Chuck, is an elderly anthropomorphic hedgehog, Sonic's uncle, a knight in the service of the king of Robotropolis, and the inventor of the Roboticizer. Every roboticized citizen in this story exists because of his invention. He designed it to save lives, his own brother's life first among them, and then he watched a dictator turn it into the single most effective instrument of oppression on the planet. After Robotnik rose to power, Charles was fed into his own machine. He became one of the many worker bots serving the Doctor, which is a particular kind of insult, not a weapon, not a general. A worker unit, indistinguishable from the rest of the fleet, built out of the man whose signature was on the blueprints. How he got out differs slightly depending on which version you follow, and both versions are accidents rather than rescues. In the Archie continuity, his memories and free will came back through a device malfunction. A test with the transdimensional teleporter in issue 30 failed, and the failure restored Chuck's free will. In the Sonic the Hedgehog television series, the one fans call SATM, Charles served Robotnik for roughly 11 years before Sonic managed to restore his free will himself. 11 years. His nephew grew up entirely inside that window. Here is where Uncle Chuck stops being a victim and becomes the single most valuable asset the Resistance ever had. He did not run. Once his mind was his own again, he made a decision that nobody else on this list makes. He stayed. Chuck chose to remain in Robotropolis, still wearing the robot body, still standing in formation, still passing for one of Robotnik's machines, and he spied for the freedom fighters from the inside. He fed them the latest information on Robotnik's schemes while continuing to walk around the enemy capital as a piece of the enemy's own infrastructure. Think about what that costs. He is one malfunction away from being discovered. He cannot be seen with his own nephew. He is surrounded permanently by other worker bots who are also people and who are not free and whom he cannot help. And he is standing inside the consequence of his own invention every single day. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on which side switch surprised you most. Let's get back into the video. Mecha Sonic. For one storyline, the fastest thing alive belonged to Doctor Robotnik, and the freedom fighters could not stop him. It happens in Archie Sonic the Hedgehog issue 39, titled Rage Against the Machine, published in 1996, and it opens the saga known as Mecha Madness. Sonic is not defeated in a fair fight. He is ambushed by Nack the Weasel, the bounty hunter, and delivered to Robotnik, and Robotnik puts him straight into the Roboticizer. The most recognizable hero in the franchise goes in a hedgehog and comes out a machine with no free will of his own. And Robotnik's gloat is the important part because it explains why this one is more dangerous than every other roboticization in the series. He does not claim to have merely captured Sonic's body. He says Sonic's powers have been digitized, maximized, and multiplied inside the machine. Roboticization normally strips a person down to obedient labor. This one took the single most dangerous physical ability on the planet and amplified it, then attached it to a will that answers only to Robotnik. Then he gives the order that makes it a horror story instead of a power fantasy. Return to Knothole and destroy it. Not a strategic target, not a military installation. The village where Sonic's friends live, with Sonic sent to level it personally. The fight that follows is the reason this arc has a reputation. The freedom fighters found themselves hopelessly outmatched. These are people who had spent years fighting Robotnik's armies and winning, and they could not touch him. Bunnie Rabbot, whose own roboticized arm and legs make her the physically strongest fighter in the group, was not enough to bring him down. The team that beats robot armies for a living got walked through by one robot because the robot was their friend with the safety limits removed. What saved Knothole was outside help. Knuckles the Echidna, the guardian of Angel Island, arrived and aided the freedom fighters against him. Sonic was eventually restored and the character came back to himself, but the storyline had already made its point. The only thing keeping Sonic from being the most effective weapon Robotnik ever fielded was Sonic's own choice. Every other entry on this list switched sides once. Sonic is the one who proved the door swings both ways. Supersonic. In Britain, Sonic's super form defected, not corrupted, not brainwashed, not possessed. It walked out of him and became a separate person, and that person wanted Amy Rose dead. Sonic the Comic was the British Sonic comic published by Fleetway through the 1990s, and its single most notorious contribution to the franchise is its version of Supersonic. In the games, going super is the reward. It is the golden power-up, the thing you unlock by collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, and it is unambiguously Sonic with the volume turned up. Fleetway asked what would happen if it was not Sonic at all. Their answer is that Supersonic is a destructive split personality created when Sonic absorbed a dose of evil energy that had itself been absorbed by the Chaos Emeralds. The trigger is not achievement, it is exposure to chaos energy, or extreme stress, or plain anger, which means Sonic could not choose when to become him, and could not choose when to stop. Every time Sonic lost his temper badly enough, somebody else took the wheel. And that somebody is not a rival or an antagonist in the usual sense. Initially, Super Sonic exists only to mindlessly destroy, a demon-shaped force with no plan. He grows worse. Over time, he develops into a cold-blooded sociopath who likes to play with his food, which is a phrase you do not expect to read about a Sonic character. His immense destructive powers, hyper-aggression, sadistic humor, and total lack of restraint repeatedly endangered innocent civilians and Sonic's own friends, and it was never framed as an accident. Super Sonic knew exactly whose friends they were. The full defection happens in a 3-part arc called Running Wild, which begins in issue 80. Sonic falls into an emerald pit on the floating islands, transforms, and then sets out with a specific goal: to murder Amy Rose. That is the plot. The hero of the comic spends 3 issues hunting his own friend with the intent to kill her in the body he shares with her. The resolution is what makes this a genuine side switch rather than a possession story. Super Sonic was sent to the Special Zone, and once he was there, he existed as a separate entity, free to destroy anyone and anything he wished. The comic did not cure him and did not reintegrate him. It cut him out and left him alive somewhere else, which means Sonic's own super form became an independent hostile character walking around the setting under its own power. And it got worse from there, because Super Sonic acquired an employer. While Sonic was in the Special Zone, a chain of events landed him in prison, and he was bailed out by a local crime boss named Lord Sidewinder, who brought him back to his mansion. Waiting there was a free Super Sonic. The most dangerous thing in the comic had been picked up by organized crime. Every other hedgehog here switched sides because something was done to them or because they were lied to. Super Sonic switched sides because he was separated out of the hero. He is not a hedgehog who turned. He is the part of a hedgehog that had already turned, given a body of its own. Rusty Rose. In one corner of the Shatterverse, Amy Rose works for Eggman, 5 of him, actually. Rusty Rose is the Amy Rose of an alternate universe in Sonic Prime, and she is what happens when the cheeriest character in the franchise gets processed by a government. In her reality, Amy was captured by the Chaos Council and turned into one of their minions, rebuilt into a cyborg and installed as the group's right hand. And the Chaos Council are not one villain. They are New Yoke City's governing body of dictators, 5 alternate universe counterparts of Dr. Eggman who came together years before the Paradox Prism incident, which means Rusty was serving a committee of Eggmans in a city named after a Yoke. Her design carries the whole idea without a word of dialogue. Amy's identity is built out of softness and enthusiasm, and a hammer she swings because she wants to. Rusty is armor, restraint, and rose-shaped machinery, a version of Amy where the flower motif has been turned into hardware. She is not a corrupted Amy. She is a manufactured one. What breaks her loose is not a rousing speech from Sonic. It is her own employers. The Chaos Council decided to abandon her because of her past failures, and that abandonment is what turned her, which is a genuinely bleak way to earn a redemption arc. She did not switch sides because she remembered who she was. She switched sides because the people she had been rebuilt to serve discarded her for underperforming. Where she went next is the best joke in her arc. She joined Knuckles the Dread's pirate crew. The most rigid, regimented, obedience-shaped character in the Shatterverse defected to a band of pirates, which is the least regimented organization available in any universe. And there is one specific moment fans point to as the hinge. Rusty was changed the moment she saw Black Rose, the pirate Amy of the Boskage crew. Because Black Rose is the proof that a version of her exists who was never processed. Not a lecture, not a fight, just standing in front of what she would have been. Her arc lands in the endgame. After Rusty helps in the battle against 9, she redeems herself, fighting on the side of the Shatterverse cast against the character who is trying to unravel reality itself. And there is a final irony to it, because in the finale, the heroes and the Chaos Council formed a temporary alliance to stop 9, meaning Rusty briefly ended up fighting on the same side as the 5 dictators who built her and threw her away. The Chaos Council's own ending is worth noting for the symmetry. All 5 of them fought each other for supremacy and became seemingly lost forever in the void. The committee that discarded Rusty for failing destroyed itself over rank. Rusty Rose is the only entry on this list who was pushed across the line by her own side. Silver the Hedgehog. Silver came back through 200 years of ruin to save the world, and the first thing he did when he arrived was try to murder Sonic the Hedgehog. That is not a misreading of his introduction in Sonic the Hedgehog from 2006. Silver is a hero. he has always been a hero. That is precisely why he is on this list, because Silver is the one case where a character switches sides without a single corrupt impulse in him. He was simply given accurate-sounding information by the right liar. The liar is Mephiles the Dark, and his method is worth spelling out because it is genuinely clever. Mephiles approached Silver and Blaze the Cat wearing the form of Shadow the Hedgehog, which gave him instant credibility with two people who had no way to verify it. Then he traveled to their future and implied that Sonic was the cause of Iblis being released, the event that had reduced their world to burning rubble. He gave Sonic a title to make it stick. The Iblis Trigger. Not a name, a designation, the kind of phrase that sounds like it came out of a record rather than a mouth, and then he ordered them to kill him. Mephiles sent the pair back in time, telling them that killing Sonic in the present would save their future, and both of them believed it, because from where they were standing, it was the only rational thing to do. Silver was not tempted, bribed, brainwashed, or roboticized. He was handed a false premise and did the math correctly on it. The manipulation had a purpose that had nothing to do with Sonic's guilt. Mephiles' real objective was to release Iblis from inside Princess Elise, and his plan required Silver as the instrument. What he needed was not Sonic dead for its own sake, but for the chain of events to unfold, and Silver hunting Sonic was how he intended to get there. The plan failed. And once Mephiles realized Silver was not going to deliver, he stopped delegating and killed Sonic himself in a blunt, brutal ambush, which released Iblis and let the two of them merge into Solaris. Silver's switch comes when he works out the sentence he had been given was pointing at the wrong person. He realizes Mephiles has tricked him and that Elise is the Iblis trigger, not Sonic. From that moment forward, Silver is one of the most reliable allies in the franchise, and he stays that way across every game he has appeared in since. There is something bitter buried in the timeline. The future Silver came from was caused in part by Mephiles succeeding. Silver was sent back to prevent a disaster by the being who caused the disaster, using the disaster as evidence. Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow spent his debut game working to wipe out every living thing on Earth, and he was doing it because he believed he was keeping a promise to a dead little girl. He was. The promise had just been edited. Shadow arrives in Sonic Adventure 2 as the main antagonist working alongside Dr. Eggman, and his stated motivation is revenge for Maria Robotnik's death 50 years earlier. To understand why that motivation was a lie, you have to go back to the man who built him. Professor Gerald Robotnik created Shadow as part of an effort to develop a cure for his terminally ill granddaughter Maria, who had Neuro-Immuno deficiency syndrome, a condition the series shortens to NIDS. Gerald had initially turned down recruitment to work on the space colony Ark. He reconsidered only when he learned his granddaughter was dying. So Shadow's entire existence is a byproduct of a grandfather trying to save one child, and then G.U.N. raided the colony. Maria was killed during that raid while protecting Shadow, getting him into a stasis pod to guarantee he survived it, which means the last thing she did with her life was make sure he kept his. Her actual dying words to him were not a call for revenge. They were the opposite. She asked him to do it for her, for a better future, for all the people who live on that planet, to give them a chance to be happy and let them live for their dreams. And she told him she knew he could do it, and that it was the reason he was brought into this world. That is the real promise. A request to protect the species that had just killed her. Gerald erased it. After hearing of his granddaughter's death, he lost his sanity and reprogrammed the other projects aboard the Ark, including the Biolizard, to destroy the Earth as revenge. And then he went further than reprogramming machines. He biologically implanted his own will for revenge into Shadow and altered Shadow's memories of what Maria had asked of him, specifically so that Shadow would carry out the plan when he woke up. Shadow spent the entire first half of that game unknowingly executing Gerald's revenge, while believing he was honoring Maria's last wish. He was not a villain who chose evil. He was a weapon with a forged instruction set, and the forgery was inside his own memory, which is the one place a person cannot check their work. What breaks it is Amy Rose, unarmed and out of options, talking to him on a collapsing space station. She told him that people fight over the most trivial things, and that some people may be selfish, like the professor said, but they are basically good, and that if they try their best and never give up on their wishes, they always have a reason to be happy. She told him that saving them is a good thing, and then she begged him to do it for them, and to give them a chance. Amy did not know what she was doing. She had never met Maria, and had no idea what Maria's real last words were. She simply happened to make the same argument in almost the same shape, and hearing it from a stranger was what let Shadow recognize the memory that had been taken from him. He shed a tear and left to help Sonic stop the arc from falling. That is the switch. Not a defeat, not a bargain, not a slow arc across multiple games. One conversation in which somebody accidentally quoted the person he had been built to love. And then Shadow kept switching, which is the honest ending to this list. He has gone back and forth between villain, hero, and something in between across 2 decades of games, comics, and film before eventually settling on being a hero. He has worked for Eggman, worked for G.U.N, worked for himself, and taken orders from a species he was programmed to exterminate. The Sonic Adventure 2 arc was not a redemption. It was the first correction to a set of instructions that keeps getting rewritten, which is why Shadow ends this list rather than Sonic's own family. Bernie, Jules, and Chuck had their will taken away by a machine that Chuck himself designed to save lives. Sonic had his taken by the same machine, and Robotnik amplified his speed on the way through, so that his friends would have no answer for him. Super Sonic was cut out of Sonic and left alive as an independent monster with a crime boss for a patron. Rusty was manufactured into a servant by 5 Eggmans and then thrown away by them for underperforming. Silver was handed a false premise by a liar wearing a friend's face and did the arithmetic correctly on it. Shadow is the only one whose side switch required nothing to be taken from him at all, because the tampering had already happened before he opened his eyes. There was never a version of Shadow that had to be turned. Gerald turned him during construction, and every arc since has been Shadow finding out what was written into him and deciding what to do about it. That is why he keeps flipping. The others had a self to return to. Shadow had to build one. Which of these switches do you think was the hardest one to come back from? Drop it in the comments.